Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Or at least a suspicion. That's what they tell me. I don't know that it's necessarily true. We'll examine that from the get-go. Now, even I sometimes question the numbers in front of me regarding the impact of that vote in 2016 to leave the European Union. We'll have a look at this later, because this isn't me being unduly modest, I promise you. This is me thinking that can't be right. There must be something wrong here. Between 2015-16 and 2017-18, the number of European nurses joining the register to work in the UK fell by 91%, from 9,389 to 805. I mean, I'm checking the figures on this. I can't quite believe it. And the only reason I was Googling in that area was because I was looking for some context to the brilliant report on the front page of yesterday's London Evening Standard, suggesting that Jeremy Hunt, the Health Secretary, Amber Rudd, remember her, the former Home Secretary, and others in the Cabinet had urged Theresa May to drop the quota that she has in place for visa restrictions, because it was actually preventing health trusts from hiring doctors. So the Prime Minister stands accused today of refusing to ease visa restrictions on the number of skilled workers allowed to come to the UK to enable more overseas doctors to work in the NHS. On the same day that we learn about the exodus from the NHS of of EU nurses on an industrial scale. So I'm looking at those two things, and I know one's doctors and one's nurses, but generally speaking, medical professionals is a fairly descriptive term. So I'm looking at this. And, you know, a lot of this programme at the moment is dedicated to the view from the outside of the rabbit hole, but it's very hard to see down a rabbit hole because it's dark and full of rabbits. So I'm trying to work out why this isn't... I know it was on the front page of the London Evening Standard yesterday, but even that is confusing, because the London Evening Standard is, of course, edited by George Osborne, who until relatively recently was the Chancellor of the Exchequer in a cabinet where Theresa May served as Home Secretary. So I can't quite get my head around how... Yeah, all right, I'll say it. I don't quite get... Is it just Brexit that means she can be so demonstrably awful and still have her job? Because the question I was minded to ask you at 7 minutes after 10 this morning was, very simply, do you think she's got away with Windrush? I don't. Except I do. When I say I don't, I mean I really, really hope not, because actions having consequences is something that we all try to teach to our children, and it's rendered all the harder when it doesn't seem to apply to the most powerful person in the country. Amber Rudd didn't go because of the abuses visited upon wholly innocent British people. Amber Rudd went because of a letter leakage that rendered her claims of ignorance untenable, inadvertently misled. Absolute hogwash. Quite what was going on in her mind, I will probably never know, because she seemed to be decent, didn't she, Amber? All right, you'll bombard me now with evidence that she didn't seem to be decent, but I don't want to become a person that doesn't trust that and doesn't look for the good in everyone, even if it leaves me into a terribly embarrassing territory, like earlier this year when I was dedicating the occasional programme to explaining why I felt so sorry for Theresa May. Good grief. But I make no apology for that. I make no apology for that. I don't want to be a footballified observer of British politics, convinced that that colour, that team, that shirt is absolute evidence of 100% reliability and integrity, and anyone wearing a different coloured shirt is a complete scumbag. As it stands, as you know, I'm profoundly unimpressed by the captains of either team at the moment. I don't support either of them particularly, but I don't want to be the person. I want to look at Sajid Javid and think, yeah, he could be all right. I want to look at John McDonnell and think, yeah, he could be all right. All the noise surrounding both of them is largely negative, or often negative, but you just... Otherwise we all go mad. We become nihilists who believe in nothing. And that, of course, is the direction in which we seem to be travelling on some mornings. So, Windrush. Do you remember when David Davis said that there were some impact assessments about Brexit And then he said there weren't. And then Labour invoked quite arcane parliamentary procedure to force the government to hand over the Brexit impact assessment so that MPs could actually scrutinise the scale of the predictions of imminent doom and gloom, while David Davis insisted that we should just ignore them. They're going to do something similar with Windrush. This is a move which, some believe, could cause quite a lot of discomfort for ministers. It's a humble address motion, and it's going to kick in today, and it will see Labour ask for all papers, correspondence and advice on Windrush between ministers, senior officials and advisers from May 2010 until now. So it will presumably provide chapter and verse on detentions or deportations, on the setting of targets for either, and it should show how much was known at how high a level about how these policies were seen or reported as affecting people's lives. So, depending on what is contained within these documents, Windrush hasn't gone away yet for Theresa May, but I'm interested this morning chiefly in... you can always tell when I'm genuinely baffled by something because I keep making that weird noise. That one. If you look at all of the polling about Windrush, and I think the most recent one I saw was on Sky News, the figure that held Amber Rudd responsible for the abuses visited upon these poor people was 4%. There's a sort of daft rump of about 18% who believe that nonsense about it somehow being the responsibility of the Labour government because of a decision taken by the UK Border Agency in 2009 and implemented in 2010 somehow it wrote the Immigration Act of 2014. So we can, with love and affection, discount them. They're sort of bonkers. 4% for Amber Rudd, about 30% for Theresa May. So we're living in a country where the British public, the will of the people, where the British public looks at this scandal, this disgusting scar upon our country, and sees political responsibility personified in Theresa May, but she's still got her job and Amber Rudd has gone. Now, technically, it's not hard to understand why Amber Rudd has gone. But politically, it's very hard to understand why Theresa May has not. So we'll wait and see what pops up today. But I'd love you to give me a quick call and tell me why you think... Because I know this is provocative, but honestly, if it had been white, elderly men and women from the home counties who, through some bureaucratic mix-up... You know how women of that generation have had their pensions retrospectively changed, so they now have to work longer. That's a really useful example for me because it shows that it doesn't have to have necessarily anything to do with country of origin. The government has the power to change the social contract that you've signed. The government has the power to tell you that the terms and conditions that you signed up to when you started paying tax or when you started breathing air, they have the right to change their side of the deal. That's, I guess, inevitable in the context of economics. But the Windrush story has taught me, and I don't know why I feel this way, given that I was born in this country and I'm British. I don't know why I have so much empathy for people who weren't born in this country and are British. I just think to get this story alive, you have to do a little bit of there but for the grace of God. And the only people I can conceive of not doing there but for the grace of God are people who look at West Indian Brits and think, well, no, of course it couldn't happen to us. I've explored this thing quite a lot. I make no apology for returning to it. I don't understand why, I mean, apart from that low-level racism, and I think that's probably an overused word in some contexts and an underused word in others, I don't understand why a Prime Minister who presided over the abuse of innocent people, the incarceration of innocent... Yeah, we are right to do this today, because every time I say it out loud, I wonder why it's not the only story in town. I really do. Innocent British people were locked up as a result of a policy presided over and implemented by the woman who is now Prime Minister. Is there a more egregious breach of the social contract than to have your very liberty removed by a politician? And that politician is still in 10 Downing Street. I kind of want you to bring me a dose of salts or something, or a new pair of spectacles, so that I can look at this and not feel the shame and disgust that I feel this morning. So Labour Party prepares to demand to see the evidence. The rest of us suddenly realise we live in a country where the evidence is not forthcoming. Transparency, openness, accountability, trust. All of these things are reserved for the privileged. And most of the time we don't realise that we're privileged. Let's get the phone lines open. If your family's been affected by this Windrush scandal, then, or by similar issues, because I still worry that the rest of the newspapers are so busy banging on about ludicrous customs union stories that completely defy reality. They're taking their eyes off this story. Can there be a more important story in a country than a story about innocent citizens being locked up as a result of policies brought in by senior politicians? I mean, genuinely, look me in the eye and tell me, what could be more important than knowing that our Prime Minister can sit idly by while policies she formulated left innocent British people in prison? Let's get the phone lines open, because I genuinely think I need your help this morning. 0345 6060 973. The reason why I sound quite befuddled is because, I mean, what happens if Labour don't succeed today in getting all the details and all the evidence? What happens if this, what's it called? It's a lovely little phrase, a humble address motion before the House of Commons later today. What if it doesn't work? What if it doesn't work? And a Prime Minister who presided over a policy that saw innocent people deprived of their liberty, their very freedom, actually locked up, walks away scot-free. I know I sometimes lean into hyperbole in my introductions of a morning, but I don't think I am exaggerating in any way, shape or form today. I can't believe that I live in a country where this is happening. I can believe that the sheer scale of the problem is being utterly missed, diluted and eroded by a completely craven and corrupt right-wing media. But, I mean, why isn't the BBC doing this at the top of every single bulletin? Give me a call and tell me why I'm being silly. Or talk to me about why you think things are unfolding as they are. I'll say it once more. We now live in a, quotes, democracy, end quotes, where you can be imprisoned because of a government policy presided over by the woman who is now Prime Minister. She can throw her former ally under a bus in order to seek to insulate herself from the consequences of that policy, but she's still got a job. She was at the Home Office for 6 years. People threatened with deportation, people removed from their homes, people who lost their jobs, people who were denied health care. And she's still in charge. I do have a question for you, actually, and it's the simplest question and the most important question that we ever ask each other. Not what. What is easy. But why? Why do you think, and I'll take any answer you've got to this, why do you think a politician whose policies saw British citizens imprisoned despite being innocent of any crime, a direct result of the hostile environment policies, again, not the rhetoric, the policies, the Immigration Act 2014 and its successor. I'm 46 years old, I'm British, I love this country, and I don't understand how my fellow citizens can be locked up without trial as a result of policies introduced by the Prime Minister, and she's still in a job. Can you explain to me? You can be, I don't know if we'll go full conspiracy theories, But in the absence of anything else, I'll take whatever you've got. You can suggest that the reason why Theresa May is still in her job is because keeping Jeremy Corbyn out of 10 Downing Street is more important than any notions of morality or civilization. That's fine. And, you know, it's also plausible. But to kind of suggest that pretending not to understand why Theresa May is still in her job is a result of nursing a secret passion for Jeremy Corbyn, that just doesn't make sense. And we're not talking about Brexit this hour, so you're not really encouraged to ring in and not make sense. I want people to make sense. How do you think we've ended up in a country where innocent citizens can be locked up without trial as a result of policies presided over and introduced by a politician who is still Prime Minister? I mean, if I put it like that, surely you share my shock and or misgivings. Anilesh is in New Cross. Anilesh, what would you like to say?
Hi, good morning.
Hello, mate.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of yours, let me accept that first.
Well, you guess, although if you do that as the first caller to the programme, everyone else who rings in thinks they have to do it as well. So let me say thank you in advance to everybody who compliments me thus, and you don't have to say it on air, because I want to know why you think, or how you think we've ended up in a country where an innocent citizen can be locked up and the person responsible for the policy can stay Prime Minister.
I do, yeah. I mean, there is a huge problem. I think there's no option available of Theresa May at this point of time. In the last couple of years, I've seen something terrible going on in this country. I came here in 2016 to study, and after that, I've seen Britain changing completely. I mean, I've had black friends here who are always concerned about their life and future. And I mean, nobody's opening up a discussion on it. Nobody accepts it, that there is a problem going on. And even in the wake of Brexit, it has gone worse.
Well, I mean, we do talk about it and we do accept it. I appreciate it's not necessarily the consensus approach of the British media to the massive upsurge in racism and the validation of previously hateful positions. But everybody honest with their eyes open knows that it's happening. Even that, though, doesn't explain this to me. You can't say the reason why Theresa May is still Prime Minister after imprisoning innocent British citizens is because we're all a lot more racist than we were before the referendum. Or maybe it is that simple. The people would be calling for her to go if they hadn't had a look at the country and thought, you know what, maybe we can get away with this because most of the people affected are black.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you in a sense.
Well, I'm wondering out loud. I don't want to agree with me.
But, you know, having said that, I think since the country is going through a phase where there is no certainty over most of the things, that's why there's nobody who's challenged Theresa May, I think. I mean, even if she's, in my opinion, since I'm an outsider, I think she's one of the weakest prime ministers this country has ever had. But still, there's nobody to challenge, which is surprising for me that in a country like Britain, which has, you know, an amazing history, still there's nobody who comes forward and say, okay, look, here is the responsibility that you should have had. Here is the answer that you should have given to the people. And still, there's nobody challenging. It's surprising for me to see how it's going on.
So, leaving Jeremy Corbyn out of the equation for the moment, in the context of her having to resign as Prime Minister because of what she did as Home Secretary, the reason why no one is agitating for that is because nobody actually wants to be Prime Minister, and the reason for that is Brexit. So it's not only going to damage us in every imaginable way materially, but you could in this context argue that Brexit has already reduced the moral fibre of this country to dust.
Yeah, but in the last, say, 6 months or 7 months, and since I'm a student of journalism, you know, I've been seeing all sorts of media houses, you know, sort of printing headlines every day, pointing out how long is she going to stay here as the Prime Minister, how long she's got, you know, to stay in the Downing Street. But nothing has happened. I mean, she's survived everything. And part of the reason is not because she's very strong.
But it is because she is she's A, very weak, and B, nobody actually wants the job, because even the most insane Brexiters know that do they though? I mean, I don't understand that. I presume there would be people that want the job, but at the moment the majority of the Conservative Party isn't actually insane enough to let them take it. I like that. I mean, you cover a lot of ground. The obvious answer perhaps is that there is a tacit acceptance of abuses visited upon black people.
Yes, it is. And, you know, to be honest with you, Jeremy Corbyn, I mean, you know, despite all the things that we say, but I mean, any opposition in the world always wants to be in the power. But in fact, he has also not been clear on many issues.
Well, that's it. I mean, yeah, you're right. That's why I said we'll leave him out of the equation, because You could say he can just sit back while the Tories tear themselves to shreds, but unfortunately they're not tearing themselves to shreds. If they were, she'd be out of her job. Alan, thank you, Anilesh. Good luck with your studies. Studying to be a journalist, whatever next. Alan is in Chesterfield. Alan, what would you like to say?
Hi, I'd say what was said by the previous caller a little bit further and say it's not just an attack like the racism aspect. The problem that you've got is there is a cohesive attack on minorities, whether it be Grenfell, whether it be Windrush, whether it be bedroom tax, whether it be universal credit. And the vast majority of people in this country, when they see each individual story, it doesn't apply to them.
I don't want you to be right. And Grenfell, if I was going to be let me be the devil's advocate. Grenfell broke something inside me, so something that I don't know I'll ever fix again. And it was the faith in my neighbours, not literally my neighbours. My neighbours are lovely. It was it was the faith in my fellow citizens, how they could look at somebody whose home had just burned down, who'd heard the screams of their dying neighbours, and reach by the next morning. Reach for hatred and negativity and criticism, but that doesn't extend to. Does that extend to the top table? I mean, is it glib of me now or facile? But she's just appointed a British Pakistani as Home Secretary. Doesn't that fly in the face of the people that were queuing up to abuse the Grenfell families?
But he was put in charge of Grenfell.
Yes.
Right, so, let's take a look at that one step further. If you want to attack the minority that is the victims of Grenfell, how do you attack them best? Reward the person who's done absolutely nothing to help them.
Come on, now, you've gone a little bit too far on that.
Maybe.
No, I'll take the first bit reluctantly. The second bit is not that Sajid Javid has been promoted because he was doing a rubbish job at Grenfell. It's too early to judge the job. It's a year, the anniversary of a year soon.
Yeah, I'm not saying that, but
I'm also told...
If I was a victim of Grenfell, James...
Yeah, that's how it would look.
It would be how it would look to me. And what I'm saying is, it doesn't look like that to the vast majority, but it does look like that to that particular victim.
Yeah, no, well, I get that, but it doesn't help me understand how a woman can preside over the imprisonment. Well, I mean, the first bit does, and the answer is they're calculating that the country won't care enough. And I'll tell you what, this is where I get a bit obsessed with the Daily Mail and other newspapers in the way they set the national tone, because I still believe, Grenfell evidence notwithstanding, that we are mostly decent, that we are fundamentally decent. And if so much effort wasn't put into making us hate-filled and fearful, then these stories would unfold differently. So I don't think it's intrinsic to the humans that we're talking about. It's a result of the environment that's been created by the Daily Mail and others. This notion that everyone is guilty until proven innocent kind of sums up Theresa May's attitude to immigration. I'm sorry, I don't want to talk about Brexit today. I will if you force me to, but we can play a little game in the meantime before we get back to the Windrush scandal. Which moaning mini Ramona snowflake do you think said this? I believe that the best way forward is for Britain to renegotiate a new relationship with the European Union, one based on an economic partnership involving a customs union and the single market in goods and services. I'll give a limited edition LBC bottom of the barrel scraper to anyone who correctly guesses who it was that recently-ish said that. Before that, though, back to Windrush. I don't understand. I do, but I don't. And the reasons I come up with that explain to me how Theresa May could still have a job despite being responsible for policies that saw innocent British people locked up. I mean, the definition, short of pulling the trigger yourself, what more could you demand of a politician or a political system that it doesn't lock up innocent people? We have failed that test, my friends. I never say my friends, but that sounded like a kind of portentous moment. What possible test do you apply to a political system if you want to have confidence in it? Well, I'd start with not locking up innocent people, because that is the stuff of dictatorships and totalitarianism. We lock up innocent people. Why? Because of policies Theresa May introduced. Why? Because she's in thrall to the psychodramas of newspaper editors who think that there are swarthy foreigners around every corner poised to steal their wives and dance rhythmically. That's why we've ended up where we are. It's really simple. And that's why I hope I'm wrong. David's in Palmer's Green. David, what do you think?
I think it's obvious that the Conservative Party's abandoned its own principles. I think that one of the tenets of right-wing thought is personal responsibility.
It is, isn't it? It's supposed to be that thing when they're talking about feckless work, shy layabouts. It's supposed to be all about personal responsibility. But, of course, what is it? Inadvertent errors. And what was Jeremy Hunt? So that's two of them. Sorry, I've already talked enough. Tell me to shut up, David. Seriously, say the words.
No,
say shut up, James.
Shut up, James.
It's like being at home. Carry on, David.
So I think it's quite interesting because I didn't like Margaret Thatcher. I didn't agree with her on a lot of things, but I think she was very principled. She believed in her principles. And you definitely can't say that about the current Conservative government. And I don't think it's the only example. I think Theresa May could have easily walked over the lost files around the child sex investigation when she was Home Secretary. That could have been cause for her to walk. But again...
Well, in the context of weaponised personal responsibility, you'd be right. I wouldn't necessarily have called for her to go over that, because that could have been, to quote Jeremy Hunt, talking about accidentally buying 9 flats off a Conservative Party donor. That could have been an honest mistake. But in the context... I mean, that you, my friend, have given me a new hobby horse. It may even be a new chapter in the book. This notion of personal responsibility when they're talking about poor and vulnerable people seems to go out of the window when they're talking about each other.
And if they've lost their own... If they won't stand by their own principles, then what are they standing on?
What do they stand for?
You were talking about wanting to avoid everything becoming nihilistic. But if you don't have principles, that's what you fall into.
So what principles is Theresa May working on? You go back to the speech she gave on the day after her election, the day after her... well, she wasn't even elected as Prime Minister, was she? Don't mention that to any Eurosceptics, will you? No one even elected our current Prime Minister, but yay, so much control. Talking about justice and equality, judge her by her actions rather than her words, and she's pretty close to disgusting.
It doesn't look like she's standing on anything, any kind of principles. It looks like she's scrabbling around, not knowing what's going on, desperately clinging on to power.
Is there any positive? Because the phone lines are open. The switchboard is full. I'd like people who swim in a different direction from me to offer up their explanation for how a Prime Minister whose policies saw innocent people imprisoned can still be in situ in a way that doesn't portray the country as lurching towards nihilism, as abandoning any form of morality, or indeed as becoming a place where personal responsibility only applies to poor people. Is there any positive? Can you think of anything that might explain this in a way that doesn't paint such a bleak picture, David?
No, I can't.
Oh, come on, mate. Try harder.
What can you?
No, but that's what you're here for. It's supposed to ring in. Just agree with me. Take care, mate. And I am genuinely having that point about personal responsibility, because off the top of my head, from the last 2 weeks, you've got Jeremy Hunt claiming that he made an honest mistake, and Amber Rudd claiming that it was an inadvertent error. One of them, of course, had to go. One of them, for reasons we'll explore on another occasion, did not. But if you were being assessed for your benefits and you made an honest mistake or an inadvertent error, presumably you'd get all the benefits you were entitled to. You wouldn't be sanctioned in any way. I mean, this government that believes so passionately in personal responsibility. Thank you, David. That's the phrase. That's the little key I needed. Personal responsibility, Mrs. May. Personal responsibility, Ms. Rudd. Personal responsibility, Mr. Hunt. Personal responsibility, if you are a disabled person, having to convince some cretin from Capita that your multiple sclerosis isn't curable. Personal responsibility, if you miss your meeting, you'll get sanctioned. But if you accidentally buy a bunch of flats and decline to declare it, that's an honest mistake. If you tell the House of Commons that there aren't any targets for deporting people and are then found to have written to the Prime Minister explaining what the targets are and how keen you are to meet them, that's an inadvertent error. And I guess if you allow morality to be debased in such a vicious fashion, then inevitably you end up with none at all, which explains how you can have a Prime Minister that can lock up innocent British people and still be Prime Minister. Morris is in Fulham. Morris, what would you like to say?
James, I'd like to apologise first because you didn't want to talk about the B word, but I am.
Oh, well, a little bit. We'll have a little soupçon of Brexit, but not too much. Before that, would you like to play my Brexit game?
Go Go on.
Who do you think said this? I believe that the best way forward is for Britain to renegotiate a new relationship with the European Union, one based on an economic partnership involving a customs union and the single market in goods and services.
Oh, gosh.
Go on, have
I don't know.
Go have a guess.
Theresa the Appeaser?
Theresa the Appeaser. No, not Theresa the Appeaser. Well, one down, and we'll leave it on the board until someone gets it right. Well, pesky Ramona might have come out with this nonsense. Talk to me, Morris.
James, Brexit, simple as. One simple answer. Reason being, in the Tory party, you've got the two wings, the stubborn Brexiters and the slightly reasonable Tory backbenchers who feel that, on the reasonable part, they feel that if Theresa leaves, they're going to get a stubborn Brexiter. On the stubborn Brexiter side, they think they're going to get a secret Ramona, in their words. You know what I mean? So they're gonna hold this out, and we'll all suffer. What bothers me, though, James...
But hang on, that means that if we hadn't voted to leave the European Union, you think that Windrush would have ended Theresa May's career?
Oh, I'd be glad if it ended her career.
No, but that's a different question, because I you know me, I don't think anyone will be surprised to hear that I have decided not to be a big fan of Brexit since learning more about the European Union. But I don't think if the result had gone the other way in 2016 and then the Windrush scandal had emerged, you think that Theresa, well, she wouldn't have been Prime Minister, would she? But you think she would have had to resign as Home Secretary?
Absolutely. I think Brexit's just turned the whole nation upside down. Absolutely.
You could be right. It's like the Hall of Mirrors. I don't know what I look like in a normal mirror anymore because everything gets distorted by Brexit.
Exactly, James. You know what bothers me the most, actually? What bothers me is how some people, I'd like to call them 21st century feudalists, they've managed to convince people with lies. One quick example, James. I'll be quick with this. One quick example.
Go on.
We'll take, what's his name now? Jean-Claude Juncker.
Yes.
The president of the European Council.
Yes.
This talk from Brexit is about unelected representatives. Well, hang on a minute. I remember in 2014 when Jean-Paul Juncker was elected by the MEPs we selected by 422 votes to 729 votes to be the president. So but
the country's had enough of experts, Morris. He's president of the European Commission, not the European Council, but these we are splitting hairs. No, but also, you know, who elected Gavin Williamson to be Secretary of State for Defence? Who elected all the people that are currently conducting our negotiations with all the unelected people? Who appointed them? Who voted for David Davis to be in charge of negotiations? Who voted for Liam Fox to be in charge of international trade? You know that these are all nonsensical observations, and you know that I've grown fat upon the fruits of pointing it out to people too daft to work it out for themselves. But I don't quite see. No, hang on. Back to Theresa May. Back to Windrush.
Yes.
I want to. Do you know this is going to sound odd, but I want to share your optimism, even though you're probably not feeling very optimistic, that we did relatively recently live in a country where Windrush would have ended Theresa May's career, and it's only a recent development. It's the belch of Brexit that has created a country where it won't end her career. Convince me that she would have gone in 2017 if we'd voted to remain and this had all come out. Convince me.
I wouldn't say 2017 because at that point, like I said, the 21st century feudalists had managed to convince decent British people that the problems in their lives were the guys that...
All right, to convince me that if Windrush had come out in 2015, Theresa May would have been forced to resign. I want to believe that.
Yes, she would have been forced to resign because at that stage we wouldn't have all these racists coming out of the woodworks. So the decent nature of the British people hadn't been tainted by this, this sleepwalking into Nazi-esque era. You know what I mean?
Well, I do. I hesitate to reach for the N-word, but I'll go for the G-word instead. A significant portion of the population has been very successfully groomed by sociopaths on Fleet Street who... of course, now face this impossible decision between either admitting that they've made a terrible mistake, in which case their entire lives become a waste. Imagine being a Eurosceptic in the House of Commons and being wise enough or bright enough to actually recognise what's happening now. For you to turn around and say, do you know what? Actually, I mean, I'm not a massive fan of the European Union, but it was none of the things I thought it was. That would make a mockery of your entire professional existence. So that isn't ever going to happen. At least not anytime soon. And the same for journalists. Imagine if you'd spent 20, 30 years banging on about leaving the European Union and now you see what it looks like. even if you still think it's a good thing to do, it's nothing like what you said it was. How do you do that? I mean, that's psychologically almost impossible, to sit there in your 50s or your 60s or your 70s and say, my whole life has been a mistake. My entire political life has been a mistake. Much of what I've dedicated my professional life to was built upon an error. It's a bit like, and this is why they like stupid titles like Brexiteer, it's a bit like a sort of elderly dragon slayer who has dedicated his entire life to protecting the village from the dragon that lives over the way, suddenly discovering that dragons don't exist. How would he feel? His whole life protecting people, warning people about a threat that didn't exist. 10:47. So first principles, I think they call it, and the idea is that you try to get down to brass tacks on which all of us can agree, however fractured and divided the country may be at the moment. And I think you shouldn't get locked up if you're innocent. You shouldn't be imprisoned without trial if you've never committed a crime. I mean, I'd go further. I don't think you should be imprisoned without trial, even if you have committed a crime, because you need to prove that you've committed a crime before you get locked up. But the hostile environment that Theresa May got so excited about as Home Secretary, you now really can see the dark heart of that woman, can't you? The hostile environment policies begun in 2014 created a country in which innocent people did get locked up. Now, either it's nobody's fault, in which case I guess you're comfortable with the idea of being locked up without trial, despite not having done anything wrong, because, hey, accidents happen. If it's your kids, hey, accidents happen. If it's your mum, hey, accidents happen. So either it's an accident or it's somebody's responsibility. If you don't think it's Theresa May's responsibility, I think you need to see a doctor. I really do. So the woman who is Prime Minister is responsible for the imprisonment without trial of innocent people. That's Britain now. That's what we've done. How has this happened? Simon's in Bristol. Simon, what do you think?
Well, I think that Theresa May sees it as collateral damage, really. If you go back to David Cameron won his election based on offering a Brexit and a choice, which ran fear and migration. Theresa May... But
I mean, look, there's plenty of people who've been persuaded to be frightened of migrants or to be cross about immigration, or, you know, they've been told they have legitimate concerns. There's plenty of people who fall into that category who surely would balk at the idea of innocent people being locked up.
Well, I don't know. I think you have to look at how much political awareness people have these days, and it's so confusing for them. And you know yourself, the media that pushes out all of the pro-Tory stuff out there is just confuses people, so they don't have the facts and the figures there. It's only when you start delving into understanding a bit of politics that you realise, systematically what's going on. And I truly believe that they're seen as collateral damage. And at a time when we're coming up to an election on Thursday across the country...
Yeah, careful. I don't know. We can't talk about that. I'm not entirely sure what the rules are, mate. So I err hugely on the side of caution rather than pushing it. Every other day, every other period of every other year, I push things about as far as I can reasonably get away with. But on that one, no, we're not talking about that at all. But we will. I'm going to move on just because you've given me the heebie-jeebies. You've discombobulated me, but we will talk again. I promise you. It's odd, this, and it's almost like the polar opposite of what phone-in programs are supposed to do. You're persuading me that things are even worse than I thought they were. I still don't buy it. I just... Well, what other explanation do you have, James? How can you live in a country where the Prime Minister can be responsible for policies that saw innocent citizens imprisoned without trial? And what's on the front page? I mean, it's not just... I'm not going to criticise The Guardian, because if it wasn't for The Guardian, there wouldn't be any Windrush. But the front page of the most popular newspaper in the country has a story about the rather wonderful Sheridan Smith's love life, which is fine, you know, bred in circuses. Times, it's got a story about BMW cars and suggestion that a pro-Brexit think tank founder might have worked for Russia at some point. Guardian... Thank God for The Guardian. Thanks to everyone for being human and not racist. Sarah O'Connor, Anthony Bryan, Paulette Wilson, Sylvester Marshall and Elwaldo Romeo, Windrush citizens, all wrongly targeted under hostile environment policy, received an apology in Parliament yesterday from the Immigration Minister, Caroline Noakes. Now, when the kids say sorry for something, I don't know what it's like in your house, but if they say but after they've said sorry, it doesn't count as a proper apology. So, sorry to these people for what they went through, but it wasn't our fault. Amber Rudd hasn't gone because of what these men and women endured. Amber Rudd has gone because she was busted lying. Theresa May introduced the policies that terrorised these people. Innocent British people. What possible explanation can there be for the rest of the country not being up in arms? Boyowa is in Southgate. Let's answer that question if you fancy it, mate. Why is there not much more widespread outrage? And I feel a little bit daft and lonely this morning, returning to this story.
Hi, James. Thank you for taking my call. And, you know, I'm really glad that you're still keeping this in the spotlight. But just before I go on, the last caller, collateral damage.
Yeah.
So you're actually, this person actually feels that it was, you're classing people that have been here for over 50 years, and there's been there's been an error.
No, he wasn't. He was suggesting that that's how Theresa May processes it morally, or processes it politically. It wasn't his. He wasn't saying it's collateral. Well, I suppose he is saying it's collateral damage in her mind, but he was as outraged by it as I am.
Oh, okay. All right, then. Well, forgive me for
That's
that.
all right. Don't worry.
Collateral. I probably wouldn't use those words, but I think you've already answered your question, you know, very early on in your conversation. The only reason why Theresa May is still our Prime Minister and is the sole architect of this complete debacle of a policy that she enforced, the only reason why she's still there is because the people that it inflicted are black.
I have to tell you something. No, wait. I've got some breaking news in front of me. I'm just double-checking it. Are you sitting down?
Go on.
You know, the basis for our conversation this morning is the Labour Party's attempts to get all the documentation published so that people like you and me could stop reaching for the worst available explanation. You've gone for essentially base racism as the only real explanation as to how this could have unfolded.
So racism is as you said.
I'm building up tension for the breaking news, boy. Will you give me a break, man? Honestly.
Go on.
What's the point of me doing the theatre of the mind if you're just going to sit there lobbing popcorn from row C?
I'm incensed.
Well, I'm incensed, but you're about to get more incensed. That's why I wanted to make sure you were sitting down while I double-checked it and listened to you at the same time. So I'm hearing that the government is to three-line whip on this motion, which means every single member of the Conservative Party in the House of Commons is being ordered to vote against the publication of the documents that would show exactly what, when and what. What, when and what? Yeah, all right, I'll let myself off that one. Theresa May knew about this from the very beginning.
Oh, God. Well, there you go. I mean, I'm so incensed by this whole thing that I'm just so completely numb.
You can't be numb, mate.
Well, I am. It's absolutely disgusting. It's disgraceful that, as you said, we live in a country that now, you know, it's got nothing to do with Brexit. Brexit is a separate thing on its own. But what it has done is it's everything, race and prejudice, everything's just come to the forefront now. It's very much, it's very much on the front pages, and it's very much on the front pages on a daily.
What breaks my heart about it, because I've been exposed to it probably a little more and for a little longer than most people, such is the nature of my work, they get angrier the more racist things get. They don't get happier. Yeah. So if I went back 5 years and looked at what I now very affectionately refer to as my troll farm, or my box of trolls, and they were all banging on about how they want this and that and the other, and immigration and European Union and yeah. And then, you know, it would be hard not to typify the ensuing few years as good for them. You know, you've got Nazis marching again in Germany, you've got the Ku Klux Klan back on the map in America, you've got Donald Trump in the White House, you've got Marine Le Pen riding high in France. So theoretically, these people should have calmed down and got happier, but they just get angrier and more hateful by the minute. And that is actually how terrible, terrible things happen to humanity. I'm going to stay with this. I just need to get to the bottom of why the government wouldn't want you or me or anyone to see all the papers regarding Windrush. I mean, if they're really upset about it, it's true. And it's, it's almost unbelievable, even by the standards of the conversations we've been having together lately. Just to be absolutely clear, Theresa May has ordered her MPs to vote against the publication of all papers, correspondence and advice on Windrush between ministers, senior officials and advisors from May 2010 until now. So I did wonder, and I used the word in the last hour, hyperbole, I did wonder if I was getting my own knickers unduly in a twist, whether or not, I'm seeing dragons on the hill when there aren't actually any. But there's no two ways about this. Innocent British people have been locked up without trial as a result of political process. The political process was built upon policies introduced by the current Prime Minister. The current Prime Minister has now ordered all of her MPs to vote against the publication of any papers that would help the public understand how this could have happened. 0345 6060 973. I'm just going to have a quick word with the producer. That's all right with you. Can we phone every Conservative MP we've got? Use the other programme's contacts as well. Just phone every single one. I don't want to beat anyone up. I just want an answer to the question, why is there a 3-line whip on this? Okay, see if anyone will come on the radio in a representative democracy and explain why. Why is there a 3-line whip on this? Ring the fella first. What was the name of the bloke who rang us the other week, embarrassed himself over Brexit? Fish, funnily enough. Give him a ring. Just see if anyone will tell us, anyone from the Parliamentary Conservative Party can explain to me and the million people who listen to this programme why there's a 3-line whip on the suppression of information that would help us to understand how the Windrush scandal could have happened. Poor old Beth. 0345 6060 973 is the number to call if you are a Conservative MP and you can spare my producer a nightmare half an hour. A 3-line whip, that's the thumb screws. That's as tough as it gets in the context of parliamentary politics. This is, to his credit, Jeremy Corbyn's probably resisted more 3-line whips than any other parliamentarian in Westminster over the years, although his attitude to loyalty has changed a little in the intervening period. But the only way in which Theresa May could demonstrate or even begin to prove that she didn't knowingly let these people be locked up would be to publish these papers. So I put it to you that if she isn't or doesn't want them to be published or won't allow them to be published, they must contain proof that she knowingly imprisoned innocent British people without trial. And I never thought the day would dawn when I would sit in front of a microphone talking to you and use those words to describe my own country. There's got to be a better explanation, hasn't there? There's got to be a less bleak analysis. And this now, for Conservative MPs possessed of a conscience, this becomes a matter of honour, doesn't it? Unless there's, maybe there's an explanation that would be, well, it would compromise national security, or it would... How can it? All they want is the Windrush stuff. Any papers, correspondence or advice regarding Windrush children, the Windrush generation, that was passed between ministers, senior officials and advisors between May 2010 and now. Why would Theresa May be so desperate for us not to see that she's ordered every single member of Parliament in the Conservative Party to vote against publication? That's all I want you to tell me. If you're a Conservative MP, why are you having a 3-line whip? 0345 6060 973. Is it a moment when we just clean the board and sit here in silence waiting for one of them to ring us? See how democracy operates in those circumstances. I'm not going to do that because it'd be an insult to all the people who've rung in to talk. But I'm very tempted to sit here until 1 o'clock. No calls. Just the occasional interjection from me so that the emergency tape doesn't kick in with Steve Allen singing Happy Birthday. I can't believe this. A 3-line whip designed to deny the British public access to the detail which would explain how innocent British people could have ended up in prison and the Prime Minister has instructed her MPs to refuse the British public access to these papers. Kaz is in Gravesend. Kaz, what would you like to say?
Hello, James.
Hello.
I'm a first-time caller.
Well, you picked your moment.
Yes. I'm boiling over in frustration with this whole situation. My father is ex-military, and he met and married my mother, who's from Central America. I was also born there as well. There's a country called Belize that's where they send all of the British soldiers for jungle training. And there is a generation of children like myself whose fathers are white British,
yes,
who married women from Belize. And it's the first time I felt like I don't belong here.
Oh.
And I've lived here since I was 8 months old. So there is no other life that I know apart from here.
But this is only from the coverage of the story and the detail that's emerged. It's not from things that have happened in your actual life. If you see, I know that sounds like I'm clutching at straws, but you see the distinction.
No, I do see this distinction, but I'm also 41, so I'm old enough to know what it feels like in the 80s, and I was spat at and called names. I've actually got a big scar on my head where someone threw a bicker at my head, calling me a racist name whilst doing it. And the environment right now doesn't feel 100 miles away from what it felt like then as a young person. And it is soul-destroying to feel that we're doing this cycle again.
Why does Windrush make you feel this way?
It makes me feel this way because I know those people are British. And they, like me, weren't born here. And what's the difference? There is no difference. So, you know, I had a conversation with my parents going, how did you register me? Because I don't have a birth certificate. I have a passport.
I think, given what's happened retrospectively, I don't think you'll face any personal problems, but that, of course, doesn't comfort you, because this is a message to you about how the country sees your status, how the government sees your citizenship.
But the problem with the government language and the media's language is that the easiest way that people find to distinguish between those who are not born in this country and people who are born in this country is by the colour of their skin. And that's what happens. People who have the right to be here, people who are born here, people that are British, when you start talking in that horrible way, the focus also turns on them. That's what happens. That's why there was a spike after the Brexit vote. That's why all of this is happening. I'm not surprised. What I am surprised
this was happening before the Brexit vote. This business in the Home Office. That's why the request for these papers goes back to 2010. And I bow to nobody in my suspicion of Brexit or my criticism of what it appears to be leading us towards. But this goes back before that. So
no, I absolutely, yes, I realise it does go back before that. But I feel like Brexit was a bit of a perfect storm in terms of enabling people to be able to come out with no fear to have these types of views and to almost have these policies in government. Let's not delude ourselves. There is still structural racism in this country, in our justice system, in our education system. It's all over the place.
And what you're using this story to describe is how comfortable some people in power are with that status quo.
Yeah, they're totally comfortable because they don't ever come up against it. That's the problem.
Will you allow me? Will you let me continue looking for a less negative analysis, or does that offend you?
Oh no, absolutely not. I'm all for having. I'm naturally an optimistic person, and don't get me wrong. I'm not like barricading my door thinking that the stormtroopers are going to be coming for me or anything like that. But it's about how you feel, and the thing is that when I talk to other friends of colour. this is also how we're feeling. And what astonishes me is that we don't have poll tax style demonstrations.
Well, it's early doors, and I think today might prove to be a pivotal moment. Can you think of any, and I'm not being facetious, I promise you I'm not, because I don't want to live in the country that we appear increasingly to be creating. Can you think of any reason why Theresa May would have a 3-line whip to deny the public access to all papers, correspondence and advice on Windrush between ministers, senior officials and advisors from May 2010 until now?
Well, James, I can't answer that optimistically. I can't. She's got something to hide. It's either intentional or it's incompetence. But either way, it's not good. And personally, I am shocked she hasn't gone. And I think some of your previous callers have put their kind of finger on the pulse about why she can't go.
No, that's operational rather than moral reasons. Is because of the mess that Brexit has created. But I don't know that I have confidence anymore that she would have gone in 2015.
No, and also, people like John Major were pushed out the door for a lot less.
Well, he got voted out in an election. Let's not get carried away. I don't think there's ever been a Prime Minister who has resigned from office on a matter of honour. You could argue David Cameron did, I suppose. I just have a quick word with Beth before we go. Actually, no, I'll talk to her in the break, and hopefully we'll have a long queue of Conservative MPs after this who can just simply, because I don't need any judgment, I don't need any opinion, a simple answer to the question, why is there a 3-line whip on a parliamentary procedure designed to allow us all to see the papers, the correspondence and the advice on Windrush between ministers, senior officials and advisors. I'll tell you what, I won't even ask you why you're going to follow it. Is that a deal, ladies and gentlemen of the Conservative Party? I won't even ask you why you're going to obey this whip. I'll give you the break on that one. I want to know why you think it's there. It's 11:16. Okay, this is a little bit weird now because I can't think of another reason for why Theresa May would issue a 3-line whip against her own MPs unless she's terrified of what's contained within the papers, correspondence and advice on Windrush that she received. She has, if you're just tuning in, instructed every single member of the Parliamentary Conservative Party to vote against a so-called humble address motion today. It's the same parliamentary procedure that saw Labour essentially forced the government to publish the Brexit impact assessments that David Davis had commissioned and then denied the existence of. Actually, there's a clue right there to how we've ended up here. What do you mean he commissioned them, then denied the existence of them and then got forced to publish them? Yeah, that's Brexit Britain, folks. That's accountability, transparency and democracy in action. So the Labour Party, Her Majesty's opposition, have submitted an opposition day motion asking for documents to be scrutinised by the Home Affairs Committee. Theresa May has instructed every single member of the Parliamentary Conservative Party to vote against this motion. In other words, to keep secret all papers, correspondence and advice on Windrush between ministers, senior officials and advisors from May 2010 until now. And I just want one Conservative MP to tell me why. Of course, they'd have to pick their phones up first. 0345 606 0973. Why is there a 3-line whip? Why? Give me one answer that doesn't equate to Theresa May having something to hide. Because that's the other great mantra of politicians like Theresa May. If you've got nothing to hide, you've got nothing to fear. 21 after 11. Salman is in Romford. Salman, what would you like to say? Salman?
Hi, hello.
Hello, mate. What would you like to say?
Hi, thanks for taking my call, actually. And thanks to Windrush, who highlighted this hostile environment, because I'm calling from highly skilled migrant. And we have been running our campaign for last 6 months, actually. And today is our 3rd protest outside the parliament against this hostile environment, what this government has done with us. Basically, what they have done is declared all the professionals who are on highly skilled, they have declared them criminals on 322.5, using section 322.5, which is bad character and threat to national security. So what this government has done in the past 2 years, actually, on the minor mistakes of the applicants who have been living in this country for over 12 years. I personally have been living in this country for 12 years. My children are born here, or 5 years old now.
Yes.
And the only problem with my application when I applied for ILR, indefinite leave to remain, The only problem with my application is my tax was submitted 6 months later, actually, you know. So which was the matter between me
and they're using that as a reason to threaten you with removal, or have I misunderstood you?
Yes, removal and deportation.
Because you sent your tax return in late.
That's correct, yes. And in 2011, you know, so in 2011, some people who submitted the tax returns late, or if they have corrected their tax return in the later month, so this government basically, they are declaring them as threat to national security or bad character under the Article 322.5 of the immigration rules. So and they have taken the work rights from the people actually, you know, who are the highly skilled, like many doctors, engineers. I am personally IT professional and data scientist. So those people, they don't have work for 2 years, and they are fighting their case on judicial review, which is not right of appeal, not right of work.
What's the name of your campaign, Salman?
Highly skilled migrants.
Well, that's it. So if I need to read up more on this, I just have a look at that. And when's your protest today?
Today at 11 o'clock, it's already started now outside Parliament in Old Palace Yard, and previous two protests, they were attended by many MPs.
I owe you an apology, Salman, because I think even 6 months ago, possibly even 6 weeks ago, I would have thought, oh, poor old Salman, he must have got slightly the wrong end of the stick, or he's selling me a story that won't quite stand up to scrutiny. But and that's why you began by saying thank you to Windrush, isn't it? Because I now think you're probably almost certainly telling the truth, and that this could have happened on Theresa May's watch.
That's correct, you know, because because Labour government basically, they invited us on all the highly skilled professionals from Commonwealth countries. They invited us to come in this country and work, because all of us are minimum with the qualification of master's degree, and all of us 100% people, they are high threshold taxpayer, which is over 40k per annum.
I hear you. I do. I mean, I'm a little uncomfortable with where you've gone on that. I understand why you have, but I wouldn't. I'd still feel outraged on your behalf if you were earning half of what you earn. But I understand the point that you're making. I will look into this more. Perhaps you could email james@lbc.co.uk with some helpful links and advice, and I apologise for not being across this stuff. I just have a quick word with Beth. Any joy? Nothing. Not even close. Anyone we can just sort of... Can we call in any favours? No? Just one Conservative MP to tell us why there's a 3-line whip. I'm sure I'm not teaching you how to suck eggs, Beth, but some people have suggested James Cleverly or Kwasi Kwarteng. Someone says Sarah Wollaston seems to be one of the nicest Tories around there. 0345 606 0973 is the number that you need. Yeah, I'll take anyone now. Just why? Why is there a 3-line whip on this? It is 26 minutes after 11. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Stephen is in Kensington. Stephen, what would you like to say?
Good morning to you, James.
Hello, Stephen.
Doing, right?
Very well, mate.
To me, in a nutshell, I just believe that she's put a 3-line whip, so people can't get to the truth, because I think it's got the potential to really be...
Can we think of any other reason? And I'm not being a sausage. Can we think of any other reason why she wouldn't want us, or even the Home Affairs Select Committee, which exists to scrutinise the Home Office? Holy moly, the words coming out of my mouth. In Britain in 2018. Can we think of any other reason?
I just think it's got the potential for mass protests right across the country because of the effect that it's had on people's families.
I don't know about that. I worry about that, because I don't know that enough people across the country would either get the information and or care enough. But of course the political press would, and they would conclude... I just need something, mate. I need something that isn't... There's a smoking gun contained in these documents, and she can't countenance the possibility of the smoking gun seeing the light of day. That's all we've got, isn't it, in the absence of a better explanation?
Yeah. I think she's in trouble, to be honest.
I know. Yeah. I don't know anything anymore.
She's in a lot of trouble, and I think what's happened with Amber Rudd, the way she done her little sharp exit the other day. Theresa May knew everything that was coming out of her mouth, knew everything that was published, knew everything that was behind closed doors, and she ignored it. And you know, she's got a whole Conservative Party behind her, and it is what it is. And they're going to follow her lead. They're going to keep it covered.
I wonder. I mean, this is when people have to stand up and be counted. This is when putting country before party, or even putting country before individual prime minister, is a duty that every Conservative MP is currently weighing up. And the fact that not one of them will talk to us suggests that they may have already made their decision. 28 minutes after 11. Stephen, mind how you go. Wesley is in Croydon. Wesley, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Thanks for taking my call.
You're welcome.
A couple of points, really. With regards to the free whip issue, I'll tell you, if I really wanted to be generous, I could say they just realised there's massive incompetence. And, that's why they don't want to show it, especially because, obviously, May was there for so many years.
Yeah, well, massive incompetence theoretically could be grounds for a resignation.
Well, I think in the typical time it would be, but I think we've seen with this government that clinging to power is the most important thing, and because they're in such a tenuous position as it is, losing more people, especially the Prime Minister, would just,
be very careless. Very careless.
Exactly.
And is there not...
we've gone.
Can we not come up with anything else?
No, I think the likelihood is, if there hasn't been an excuse been given already, I think it'll probably be the usual spiel of, it's for national security, or... How
can it be national security if it's...
They always manage to use that excuse regardless.
But the Tory MPs going into the Tory MPs going into the lobby today haven't had it explained to them. They must know. So if someone said to them it's national security, they can tell us now. This is how democracy works.
You would think they're probably scrambling for their excuses, because I think, in all likelihood, it just shows that this is this was a tactical, action that was taken to, as we all know, a hostile environment. And I think, following the reactions to Amber Rudd quitting and their excuses, is quite interesting, because obviously there's always the narrative afterwards that's being pushed in defence of these things. And the one that I've noticed at the moment is the Conservative Party themselves are focusing purely on the technical reason, or Amber left because she lied, and
inadvertent error, mate. Inadvertent error, Wesley.
Sorry, I always forget to follow the official line.
Quite right, too.
No, but so that's
taken to the tower.
But when it comes to the news questioning, and they've got their supporters and other Conservative members, they keep trying to conflate the left's argument with us trying to merge illegal and legal immigrants together. I've noticed. So
of course they do. Well, this was Diane Abbott's intervention was brilliant. She takes an awful lot of criticism, Diane Abbott. I happen to believe she deserves a lot of it, but none of the misogyny and racism. But her political acuity over the years has been much sounder than it seems to me to be today. And she just said you cannot create a hostile environment for illegal immigrants without creating a hostile environment for everyone who looks like an immigrant.
Exactly. So I think what they're trying to do is they're trying to force the conversation to make it seem that the left are basically saying, we don't care about having immigrants, bring them all in. And obviously I think that's one...
They're trying to change the debate around. Actually, the polling among Labour supporters gives the lie to that. That was a pretty grim piece of polling, but you make a valid point about where they're trying to lead the rhetoric. 31 minutes after 11. In the absence of a Conservative Party MP, I'll happily take a call from a Conservative Party supporter or voter. Just explain to me why you think Theresa May doesn't want you to know what she was told about innocent British people being imprisoned without trial on her watch as Home Secretary as a direct result of the hostile environment policies that she introduced. Call Nick Timothy as well while we're here. 11:31 is the time, where I don't think anyone will be surprised to learn. I'm going to continue trying to find out why you think there's a three-line whip on a Labour Party motion designed to force the government to disclose all details regarding the Windrush scandal. Now, didn't Sajid Javid say on Monday that he was determined to leave no stone unturned? He was really determined to get to the bottom of this. Well, here you go, mate. Fill your boots. Vote with the Labour Party to ensure that the Home Affairs Select Committee can see every paper, all correspondence, all advice on Windrush between ministers, senior officials and advisors from May 2010 until now. Because I'll tell you what I think is happening. I think they're gambling now, and they're gambling on the thing that we've been discussing for the last half an hour, or the last 90 minutes. They're gambling on their friends in the newspapers helping them persuade the British public not to care enough about this. That's what they're gambling on. We'll do a three-line whip. That idiot on LBC will wet his pants. He'll ring up all the Conservative. We'll just phone the Sun and get them to do another hatchet job on him tomorrow. So that's the gamble. Oh, give me a better example. Give me a better explanation. That's the gamble now. We're going to sit on the proof that she knew. We're going to order every member of the parliamentary party to vote to keep the truth in the dark. And we're going to get away with it because we are so in hock now to the Daily Mail and the Sun that they'll help us. It's the only way in which we can continue pretending that Brexit isn't going to be a complete disaster. This unholy trinity of Tony Gallagher, the editor of The Sun, the Daily Mail and Theresa May, dedicated to what? I do not know what it is they think they're winning or they will win at the end of this process. But keeping her there has become the priority of those two newspapers and their owners. Keeping her there, despite the fact that today the truth about Windrush could emerge, and she has mobilised everything within her powers, literally everything within her powers, to ensure that it doesn't. What do you think they'll do? What do you think Conservative MPs will do? Individual Conservative MPs who've expressed disgust and shock and horror at what has happened to Windrush children. What do you think they're going to do? Because a 3-line whip is quite a big deal. Mark's in Milton Keynes. Mark, what is going on? You're not a Conservative MP, are you, Mark, by any chance? Not Mark Garnier ringing from the Wire Forest, by any chance?
Look, I know this is the first time we've spoken, but there's really no reason to insult me in such a way.
You're clearly new to the programme. What would you like to say, Mark?
Well, basically, Theresa May's 3-line whip is just a continuation of Tories' main political thrust, which is party before country, remaining in power before anything. You'd have thought she'd actually want to get out of it. I mean, she's being attacked by a right wing and the 29 Club. She's losing Brexit. The hostile environment is coming back to bite her in the buttocks.
Well, except it can't bite her in the buttocks, to coin your rather eccentric analogy. It can't bite her in the buttocks if the party vote to keep the teeth in a box. I think we've gone too far with this analogy now.
Yes, okay.
But I don't know, because I recognise what you say, and I understand the history of party before country, and I understand the history of but this seems to me to be beyond the bounds of anything that we've experienced before. I hope it's one of those days I come off air at 1 o'clock and wonder what I got so excited about. But it seems at this point to be beyond the bounds of what we've experienced before, because it's her Home Office. That's the amazing thing. That's the alignment of the planets. One Home Secretary has already gone, but she inherited the system from the woman who's currently Prime Minister. And a map of the system is in existence, which we could all have a good butcher's at, and she has now instructed every member of her parliamentary party to vote against letting us see that map. I don't think I've ever heard of anything like this before, even against the backdrop of, party before country.
Well, yeah, but she is an incompetent. She got to her position by default. Amanda Rudd, I think, was the last person in the choice, and even the Tories choosing between Rudd and Gove,
yes.
That only left her, and now she's in. I mean, one of the things that I wanted to bring up was, I forget now whether it was 2011, but it was when Theresa May was a shadow minister, and she was taking to task the Labour Party over her. She was dismayed that honour had gone, that taking responsibility had gone. Yeah, she thought that ministers and other people shouldn't hide behind their.
Oh God, we've got the clip.
Yeah, they're civil servants. But now that she's in power, and she's the one that's going beyond.
I've got her describing and talking about exactly what you describe. I played it out ad infinitum last week. This is her view on what individual ministerial responsibility looks like, and her attitude to politicians who either duck responsibility or or fail to be accountable. I mean, I'm feeling a bit... I'll use a word that I don't fully understand the meaning of, Mark, lest anyone misunderstand or misconstrue what I'm about to say, but I'm feeling a bit trippy. I'm feeling a bit like, what? Hey? How can that be? The fruit just started talking.
A different universe?
A different universe.
Parallel?
Yes, a parallel universe.
The only other thing I would say is that hostile environment shouldn't just be targeted at Windrush. It is actually against society as a whole. The hostile environment, ask a disabled person.
Yes.
Ask a person on welfare. Ask anybody that can't sort of rushing, forget.
Yes, no, I've had, a lot of people have been in touch to point this out, and I mean, I think Jeremy Hunt, didn't he introduce one of the first platforms of hostile environment policy? I'll double check on this, but you're right to remind us that it is by no means confined to Windrush, or indeed confined to British people born elsewhere, or indeed confined to any single section of society. It spreads across this government's policies, and not just going back to 2016 either, and going back to 2010. I'm going to ask everybody this because I'm a bit weird. Is there no answer to the question I'm asking that doesn't at least suggest very, very strongly that she's got something quite huge to hide? Is there an operational or a constitutional or a procedural answer that could just calm my heebie-jeebies a bit?
I can't imagine. And one would have thought that one of her supporters or her own office would have come up with it. What I don't understand is how she could think that there would be an upside.
Oh, I do.
What's the upside?
Numbers.
Forget.
Numbers. That's the only reason she stuck with the students, even after having it explained to her that they weren't overstaying. I think she believed a figure that put it at about 100,000. The reality was about 4,000, but she stayed with the policy. So it's got nothing to do with humanity and everything to do with seeing these individual human beings as mere numbers on a statistical spreadsheet, like we just heard from the fellow who's protesting about highly skilled migrants being persecuted. This is why she's got a three-line whip, isn't it? It has to be. And in the absence of an actual answer to my question, we have little choice but to arrive at the most unpleasant conclusions.
You mean...
Mark, I've got to go to a break, my friend. I've enjoyed... Did you enjoy it? Is this your first time on the radio or just your first time with me?
No, radio. I was on Radio World Service back in the days, but this is the first time with you.
Very good.
First time privately.
You're a natural.
You made it a...
Good man. You'll go far. It's 11:45. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, and I don't really know what to do now, because we have tried and failed to get a single Conservative MP to tell us why they're having a three-line whip on the Labour opposition motion, simply asking for the publication of papers regarding Windrush. None of us have managed to muster up a explanation for why they would do that doesn't contain the contention that they must have something to hide, something quite serious. And it's totally binding. So if you oppose it, you are clearly hiding something. What do you think they're hiding? I think I know. So, luckily, we've got Will Hurst on the line, who I was scheduled to speak to about something completely different, so at least gives me a little bit of breathing space, not only to learn about the latest developments regarding Boris Johnson and the Garden Bridge, but also to have a little think about where we might go next with regard to this astonishing story that no Conservative MP is prepared to talk to us about. Daniel Kawczynski was, apparently, MP for somewhere in Shropshire, and then they told him who the presenter was, and he pulled out. 11:50 is the time. Will Hurst is here, the editor, managing editor of the Architects Journal, and you have written to Boris Johnson, Will. Talk us through the whys and the wherefores.
Hi, James. Yeah, well, this all goes back to his appearance at London Assembly, but back at the beginning of March. He was summoned there, which was a time a former mayor had been summoned by the London Assembly to talk about the Garden Bridge project. And during that appearance, he attacked the Architects Journal and me for our journalism on this.
Accusing you of abuse, which is, I guess, a movable feast, but also calumnies, which is a posh word for lies, and so quite easily checkable.
Yeah, and he said that we'd written horrendous, abusive things about TfL and GLA officers, motivated, he said, by a dislike of the Garden Bridge designer Thomas Heatherwick, who happens to be a non-architect. So I think this was his way of saying, because we are the Architects Journal, we must be biased against any designer who is not a qualified architect. I don't know why that would logically cause us to attack TfL officers, but he didn't explain that. He didn't actually name me, but it was quite clear that the articles he was alluding to were written by me, because I've done this investigation over the past 3 and a bit years at the AJ, and I was immediately identified. I was there sitting a few feet away from him, so it was quite shocking when you suddenly become the story.
Yes.
And there was a sort of intake of breath from the journalists around me, and they immediately started tweeting about this and writing about this. And he's done it. I think he's trying to do a bit of a U-turn, because obviously he doesn't want to withdraw the comments or apologise for them, which would be the proper and decent thing.
And that's what you are asking him to do, and that's also what Andrew Gwynn MP wrote to him, requesting that he either produce evidence for this public claim or withdraw and apologise for it.
Yeah, so Andrew Gwynn, who is the Shadow Community Secretary, wrote to Johnson in the wake of these allegations, and as you say, called on him to withdraw them or apologise for them or provide evidence for them. And we got hold of a copy of Johnson's reply at the 9th of April, and in that he completely fails to answer Gwynn's other questions about the project, saying that there's been enough scrutiny, basically, of what's gone on, and he's given all the answers. And then he goes on to say, quote, "Elsewhere in your letter you raised Mr. Hurst by name. I did not. I'm afraid I cannot say whether or not Mr. Hurst was responsible for the copy that has been repeatedly mentioned to me." So I thought this was ludicrous and quite amusing, really, that he'd launched this vociferous attack on a journalist, but he didn't now seem to know the identity of the journalist.
Yes. I suppose he might have read the articles without noting the byline. Well, we've all done that.
It's possible, but then I had been sort of badgering his office for years, really, while he was in power and getting statements in his own name. So I think somebody probably did tell him who was responsible for this headache regarding his beloved project. So, yeah, I do find it rather hard to believe. Anyway, yes, as you say, I've written to him now, pointing out that it was me who was attacking, even if he didn't name me, and trying to clear up his confusion. Yeah, we'll see what he does next.
And for people who haven't been following the story quite as closely as you have, and indeed I have tried to, your beef with Boris Johnson continues to hinge upon the whereabouts of a rather large sum of money.
Yeah, there's about £46 million that was spent on this non-existent bridge, and very few answers about how such an enormous sum was spent. We recently published an article by the consultant Dan Anderson, who's had a very good go at trying to work out, in the absence of proper records from the Garden Bridge Trust, because they still haven't filed accounts, where this money went. And I think we do know quite a bit about how TfL managed to give them so much money, mainly because rules that were put in place to try and protect the taxpayer were broken. The construction contract was signed, so all this money was spent once that construction contract was signed, even though there had been specific attempts made when the project was born to try and stop that happening, to try and say we'll only spend, I think it was 16 million or something, and we won't spend any more unless a construction contract is signed with specific conditions attached to it. So yeah, it's still a bit of a
funny, isn't it? It's an odd time to be in this business, isn't it? Because like you, I sense that some of the stories that we should be concerned about are not generating the concern that they should, and some of the stories that are essentially a whole heap of beans are drawing epic amounts of attention from some of our colleagues in the media. Do you think this will go? I mean, in what circumstances would it go away? If they published the accounts that made clear where every penny had gone? If somebody, do you see what I mean? What does success look like for you, Will Hurst, on the Garden Bridge story?
Well, I think there's two things that need to happen. The accounts need to be published, and it's up to the Charities Commission to be robust on that. They have threatened regulatory action because the accounts are 90 days or more than 90 days late from the Garden Bridge Trust. There seems to be some commercial confidentiality that is being cited for that, but we don't know more than that. And the other thing is the minutes of all the Garden Bridge Trust meetings, which Transport for London has obtained after a struggle from the Garden Bridge Trust. Obviously, Transport for London were their public sector sponsor and their source of all money. And even so, it took a sort of legal threat, apparently, from TfL to get hold of these minutes, but they still haven't made them public. They've been sitting on them for 2 months.
Yes.
We have to ask why that is. Is it because TfL are going to be embarrassed when we see what is in there?
Yes.
I mean, what we do know is that £23 million was spent in 9 months on the following. 1, progressing the design. 2, obtaining licenses, permits and planning approvals. 3, selection of trees and plants. 4, river survey and ground investigation works. 5, procurement of contractors. And 6, placing orders for materials. But how you could spend £23 million on that between July 2015 and March 2016 is staggering. I don't understand that, unless, of course, the placing orders for materials somehow involved actually building stuff, prefabricating the bridge in some respect.
Yes.
But you had.
But I mean, in the absence of publication, we're left with nothing but speculation. Well, it's a curious world. Will Hurst, let us know when you get a reply from Boris Johnson, won't you?
Will do.
Thank you very much indeed. Managing editor of the Architects Journal, doing astonishing work. Indeed, some of the best journalism currently is being done in areas that a couple of years ago I wasn't fully aware of. I mean, I've told you quite a few times that I'm not the most assiduous reader of The Guardian, which, to my shame, is why I missed the Windrush story developing properly. The Architects Journal, on actual scrutiny of local government, has been astonishingly good, particularly with regard to this Garden Bridge. 11:58 is the time, coming up to 11:59. I don't know what to do next. You feel free to actually send me an email if you want. I must start reading my emails. Well, how should we conduct the last hour of the show? I could just go off and do something completely different. I think we probably should. But with a side order running throughout of this simple question, and if nobody is going to answer, who's a Conservative MP, I don't think I can spend an hour just dancing around that fact with you, with us all offering up our similar speculations, because in the absence of an actual answer from an actual parliamentarian to the question, why are you having a 3-line whip on the Windrush documents, we have no choice but to conclude that they're having a 3-line whip on the Windrush documents because the Windrush documents contain evidence that Theresa May was complicit in the incarceration of wholly innocent British citizens without trial. There is no other alternative until you tell me what it is. What could be a secret so huge that she has to employ the full weight of a parliamentary 3-line whip in order to keep it secret? Answer, well, it's a secret that would do for her prime ministership, which now means that every Conservative member of Parliament is deciding whether or not to do what is decent and honest or true, or to do what Theresa May is telling them to do. I suppose there's one possibility, isn't there, that she's sort of saving up a zinger for PMQs and Labour have walked into another trap. They thought they'd set a trap last week when Theresa May said, actually, you'll find the hostile environment or the order to get rid of these papers was 2009, and a very small, I say small, 18-19% of people have fallen for that rubbish. So, of course, if you're one of those people, I apologise for describing you as a gullible mug, but if you are one of those people who's been clinging to the notion that Windrush was somehow Labour's fault, then you've got two problems now. Number one is, if it's Labour's fault, then Theresa May can publish everything and prove it, right? Number two is, of course, the realisation that you've been mugged. So we'll keep an eye on that. We'll keep an eye on PMQs. That would be, at the moment, my most positive analysis of the Prime Minister's decision to order her MPs to vote against the publication of documents that would prove, one way or the other, what role she played in the incarceration of innocent British people without trial. Okay? So we'll leave that one hanging. And I hope, because I genuinely, regardless of what your politics are, I don't want to live in a country where that has happened. So I hope that there is, in the next few minutes, something in the House of Commons that suggests things aren't quite as black and white as they currently appear to be. You know this programme. Big fan of nuance. 5 minutes after 12 is the time. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. So some of the MPs that normally... Peter Bone, no, not going to do that one, thank you. Beth's been beavering away in the production office trying to get Conservative MPs to come on the programme, including the ones that normally turn up for the opening of an envelope. Astonishing, really. Not one of them. None of them. Ho-hum. 5 minutes after 12. I'm going to move on to something completely different, but I'm leaving that there as a question that if you have an answer to it, I will bite your arm off, OK? 0345 6060 973. An analysis of why they've put a 3-line whip on the Windrush on the Windrush proposal today that offers up something other than Theresa May having something rather huge to hide, OK? So I don't want to spend an hour now just as all going, well, she must have something really huge to hide. I say, I'll tell you what, James, she must have really something huge to hide. You're absolutely right, caller. I suspect she's got something very big to hide. So there's no point doing that, is there? Is there? So we won't. We'll move on to something completely different. But if you can answer the question in a way that doesn't simply subscribe to the school of thought that says she must have something rather huge to hide, then you can still join in during this hour. Before we move on, I'll just remind you briefly of something referred to by a previous caller, which is Theresa May's recorded attitude to such concepts as ministerial responsibility or facing the consequences of your own actions as a serving minister.
Yes, I think government has lost control of its immigration and asylum policy. Frankly, I think we see a degree of chaos in what is happening, and what is perfectly clear from what has taken place and been admitted by the government at the beginning of this week is that we have in this government ministers who simply don't know what is going on in their department. We have departments that deny the truth and have to have it dragged out of them. I find it extraordinary that a minister isn't willing just to step up to the plate and take the responsibility. Right. And it seems to me that you don't have to take a ministerial job, you don't have to take the car and the extra pay and so forth, but when you do, there is responsibility that has to be taken with it. And I'm actually sick and tired of government ministers who simply blame other people when something goes wrong and are not willing to take responsibility for what is happening under this government and their decisions.
So she thought that there might have been ministers in the department who didn't know what was going on with regard to immigration. And today she's issued a 3-line whip against her own MPs to ensure that no one can find out what ministers in her own department knew what was going on with regard to immigration. I don't think I've ever heard a more perfect example of hypocrisy from a British politician. And my God, I'm overrun with examples and competition. But to say in opposition there are ministers in that department who don't know what's going on with regard to immigration, and to say in power, don't let them see what ministers knew with regard to immigration. That's actually, even by these weird standards, that's incredible. I just had one of those very, very rare crises of confidence that regular listeners to this programme will probably struggle to believe ever occur, where I say to Theo Usherwood in the break before he joins us live on air, I said, I haven't got this wrong, have I? I haven't made an idiot of myself with regard to this 3-line whip. There is only one conclusion you can draw, and that is that they're terrified of something coming out that would lead directly to Theresa May's door. And I'm delighted to report that Theo Usherwood said...
You're in a good place.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay.
Back to PMQs.
PMQs. Jeremy Corbyn started off with Windrush, and he had a good opening question.
Mr. Speaker, did the Prime Minister feel the slightest pang of guilt when the Home Secretary was forced to resign due to the failures of her predecessor?
Jeremy Corbyn, of course, is referring to Amber Rudd's appearance in front of the Home Affairs Select Committee last week, where she said that there weren't targets, and of course Theresa May, having been the Home Secretary beforehand, would have, well, the targets were introduced on her watch, and there have been questions all week about why she didn't just put in a phone call, just say, Home Secretary, I think you've got this one wrong. You might just want to come back to the Home Affairs Select Committee.
This letter off you.
Yeah, you might just want to go back, and of course I introduced the targets, and you might want to go back and just update the House of Commons. So you made a mistake.
Again, this is one of those things I have to double check with you, that the Emperor really is naked.
But to be fair, I should just say what Number 10's response is to that, and that is that because she's no longer Home Secretary, Theresa May wouldn't be appraised if there being any changes to targets being introduced or whatever. So I'm just giving that for balance.
To which I respond by saying, well, there's only one way we can be absolutely clear about who knew what and when. Let's publish all the documents.
Very good, and that's why Labour have put down a brilliant piece of parliamentary procedure from a tactical point of view.
Who's the tactician on this? Because it is a brilliant piece of parliamentary
I know who the tactician is. It's one of those people who can't be named.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Will you tell me afterwards?
Yeah.
Carry on, and then I'll tweet it.
So they put down a humble address, which is reserved only for a Queen's speech. And what's really important about this humble address is that there has to be a vote on it. If there's a vote on it, that vote is binding. And what we saw last week with the customs union, and I talked to you about this, wasn't it? The government simply backs away. Just, please, everybody, go back to your constituencies. Got local elections coming up. Make sure you do some campaigning. Keep busy. Whatever you do, don't lend credence to the fact that there's this vote by voting in the House of Commons. But now, because this is a humble address, the result is binding. If the government lose it, the government is going to have to produce every text, every email that pertains to the Windrush scandal. And that goes directly, of course, one would think, to Theresa May's door. And that's why she had this concession this afternoon.
We all share the ambition to make sure we do right by members of the Windrush generation, and that's why he will be announcing a package of measures to bring transparency on the issue, to make sure that the House is informed, to reassure members of this House, but more importantly, to reassure those people who have been directly affected. Speed is of the essence, and my right honourable friend will be commissioning a full review of lessons learned, independent oversight and external challenge, with the intention of reporting back to this House before we rise for the summer. And the review will have full access to all relevant information in the Home Office, including policy papers and casework decisions.
So he, of course, is Sajid Javid, the new Home Secretary.
And so Sajid Javid now, we have to ask ourselves if he finds evidence that...
But it's only the inquiry that has access. It's not the public.
No, I know. So that's the problem, because we now have to ask ourselves whether, if Sajid Javid finds evidence that Theresa May knowingly incarcerated innocent British people without trial, do we think he'll blow the whistle? That's where we are now.
Or if he has the authority to blow the whistle. He's only the Home Secretary. He's not the Prime Minister.
Yeah.
So that's where we are.
So that's what we're asked to believe. We're asked to trust Sajid Javid. If he finds incontrovertible evidence that Theresa May is culpable for the incarceration of innocent British people, we have to trust Sajid Javid that he'll come forward and say so.
In the House of Commons.
While working for Theresa May.
Yeah.
Who appointed him.
Yeah. And it could potentially... The logic is...
Jeremy Corbyn must have gone to town now, Theo.
He must have gone to town, you would have thought, but then he diverted... Well, look, let's concentrate on what he did say in response to Theresa May.
Jeremy Corbyn. Mr. Speaker, this was a crisis made in the Home Office by successive Home Secretaries. And only a week ago today, the member for Hastings and Rye, then Home Secretary, was denying there were any targets in front of the Home Affairs Select Committee. On Monday, the Prime Minister told the media, when I was Home Secretary, yes, there were targets. One wonders why the Prime Minister didn't tell her Home Secretary about that. And the pain that's been caused to the Windrush generation needs to be resolved very rapidly and full compensation paid as quickly as it can be possibly done, and an understanding of the hurt that they feel.
Theresa May, very short answer, because after that question, Jeremy Corbyn went on to mention the economy, police funding, schools budgets, NHS and waiting times diverted away from the Windrush because...
I mouthed the word why at you fool. You can't respond by saying because.
Sorry.
Oh, it's so professional. Bring me sunshine. I just did a silent why, and you went because. Carry on.
Because it's all about clip for Facebook.
Do you think it is? Because
I said it last week.
That there'll be a really cool self-contained thing that he's been working on and rehearsing at 30-second clip. I mean, look, he might be the last person on the planet to complain about clips going viral. They can affect enormous change to one's status and career, and if it can work with a lowly radio presenter, it can no doubt work with a leader of the opposition as well. But when he went round the houses on everything instead of just picking on one thing and hitting a heat repeatedly over the head with
local elections, and then you can splice it up in. I bet his person. He's got very very clever chap working for him who cuts it all up, puts it together with some video content, and off you go. There you go, and then it reaches thousands and thousands of people. How many people watch PMQs? They listen to us talking about it afterwards. How many people manage to sit down and watch it live? So that's the thinking behind that. Theresa May did have a response, very short, but of course she was let off the hook.
I was Home Secretary when some of these decisions were taken and mistakes were made about individual cases, and I've apologised for that. The former Home Secretary also apologised for that. The Right Honourable Gentleman is right in saying these are decisions that have been taken under successive Home Secretaries, including under the last Labour government.
Lots of Brexiteers getting very, very worked up about Ollie Robbins going around telling cabinet ministers, he's the chief Brexit negotiator, that they have to get on board with the Prime Minister's plan for a customs partnership. They don't like the idea. Bill Cash, chairman of the European Scrutiny Committee, asked the PM why Mr Robbins wasn't going to come before his committee and answer questions.
The European Scrutiny Committee, of which I have the honour to chair, has invited Mr Ollie Robbins to appear before the committee on several occasions since February. So far, this has not been arranged. Would my right honourable friend be good enough to use her charm to ensure that Mr Robbins does appear, as has already the Chancellor himself and the Secretary of State for exiting the Union and Sir Tim Barrow?
He wants Ollie Robbins to come before his committee and ask questions. And then finally I picked out this one just to annoy you, James, just to ruin your lunch. What?
My question to the Prime Minister is, in 332 days' time, will she come to Wellingborough, where she will be carried shoulder high through the streets to the echoing of cheering crowds, and I will be able to show her the site where a statue to the Brexit Queen will be erected?
Can I say I'm tempted.
Order! I don't think we were in any danger of not hearing the question. But we must hear the answer. The Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My honourable friend's absolutely right. We will be leaving the European Union, and I'm tempted to say to his request, how can I refuse?
That's lovely. I love the way that laughter will be like a soothing balm for all the people who've lost their jobs, their liberty, their livelihoods, their security and their health treatment over the last 4 or 5 years as a direct result of that chuckling woman's policies.
Peter Bone was asking the question.
I should give a shout to Bill Cash as well, because Bill Cash was the only Conservative MP that did respond to our plea for a Tory to talk to us about this three-line whip. But bless him, the producer who sent the text didn't know that Bill's son is one of my oldest and dearest friends, and when we spoke to him, he was under the impression that I needed someone to explain to me what a three-line whip was. So I'm quite why Theresa May is calling it as a question that remains in need of an answer.